Shabbat Shalom, everyone. And we're going to welcome everybody onto the screen who's here. Shabbat Shalom to you.
Sort of like Romper Room when you say Shabbat Shalom to you and you and you. But you don't remember Romper Room, right?
I have no idea what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
I knew that was coming.
So we're going to move into just an opening nigun, an opening melody without words.
And it's not from Romper Room, I promise.
And make sure you've got your prayer book with you. If you haven't gotten it, Sarah can hand it to you as you walk in.
Yai dai dai, yai dai dai dai, yai dai 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 dai, yai dai dai, yai dai dai dai, yai dai 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 dai, yai dai 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 dai, yai dai 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 dai, yai dai 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 dai. Yai dai 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 dai, yai dai 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 dai, yai dai 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 yada dai, yai dai dai, yai dai dai dai, yai dai 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 dai, yai dai dai, yai dai dai dai, yai dai 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 dai. Yai dai 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 dai, yai dai 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 dai, yai dai 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 dai, yai dai 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 dai, yai dai 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 dai, yai dai dai dai, yai dai dai.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
So I want to begin with just a few announcements and then kind of a framing for tonight's service. So we want to make sure that if you've come in, you've grabbed our prayer book. If you need large print prayer books, you can find them outside and to the right. In addition, if you need hearing assisted devices, those are also outside and to the right. And if for some reason you're having trouble understanding us because of the way we're using the mic or the speed in which we're talking, I'll invite you to just raise your hand and tell us, and we'll make sure to change so that everyone can hear. In addition, if you need the bathrooms, you can find them outside and to the right. But if you need an all gender or you need handicap accessible bathrooms, feel free to use the ones in the office. And if you're breastfeeding, you can also use in my office so that you can have a semblance of privacy. In addition to that, should you need emergency exits, of course, there's the way in, but also notice there's a few exits here should there be fire or any other reason. And should you notice that there's anyone near you who's having trouble following along, maybe they don't know where we are in the prayer book, maybe they don't know where we are in the page, feel free to lean over to them and show them. That way we can all be together. And know that sometimes, even if you don't know the words, sometimes humming along or a simple yababa or bim bim bam is plenty and enough. So with that, before we move into the lighting of our candles, tonight I wrote only a few hours ago about the decision of the Supreme Court of overturning formerly Roe v. Wade. And I'm going to speak about that a little bit later in our service. But I want to say that right now, I was thinking about the world that my kids are growing up in. I gave them a kiss as I walked out the door. Ayala and I always bless them each and every Shabbat. We say, I love you to them. And then we think about the hopes and dreams that we each have for them. Ayala spends a good amount of time actually after she lights the candles, really praying for our family and praying for our kids. And I do to a lesser extent as well. And one of the things about Shabbat is that Shabbat is supposed to be what is called Me'ein Olam Haba, a taste of the world to come. It's supposed to be a glimpse, not just into the world that is, but a world that could be, a world that you want to get to. And so this Shabbat, as we think about the world that we live in now, we think of the challenges we have to face, we think of the hurdles we have to overcome. One of the gifts of Shabbat is that it gives us permission to also dream about the world that could be. And so over the course of services, I want to invite you to do just that. And so we're going to move into the lighting of our candles, into our Kiddush. And I want to call, though she's troubleshooting for us right now, thank you, Sharon, Rabbi Sharon Litwin, who, if you don't know, is our new Director of Youth and Family Education. and just an amazing asset to our team. We're so excited to have you here. She's going to be leading a few services over the course of the summer as well, and you'll get to know her. But she happened to be here tonight, and so we want to give her the honor of lighting our candles and leading Kiddush.
No.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat.
Amen.
Page number 5.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho v'ahava uvratzon hinchilanu zikaram lema'aseh v'reishit ki hu yom techila lemikra'ei kodesh zecher letziat mitzrayim kivanu v'acharta ve'otanu kidashta mikol hamim v'shabbat kodshecha ve'ahava uratzon hinchaltanu Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh hashabbat.
Amen. L'chaim.
L'chaim.
Thank you. So we're going to move forward now in our prayer books. We are on page number 20 as we join together in the words of Lachatodi.
Lechadodi likrat kala yalalai 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 b'nei Shabbat nikabelai yairai lechadodi likrat kala yalalai 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 b'nei Shabbat nikabelai Shamor v'zochor v'dibor echad Hishmi'anu el hamyuchad Adonai echad u'shmo echad L'shemo tiferet v'litchila Lechadodi likrat kala yalalai 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 b'nei Shabbat nikabelai yairai Lechadodi likrat kala yalalai 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 b'nei Shabbat nikabelai likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha ki mekor habracha merosh mikedem nesucha sof maaseh b'machshavat tchila lechadodi likrat kala yalalai 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 b'nei Shabbat nikabelai yairai lechadodi likrat kala yalalai 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 b'nei Shabbat nikabelai hitoreri kiva orek umi uri shidaberi kevod Adonai alayik nikra lechadodi likrat kala yalalai 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 b'nei Shabbat nikabelai yairai lechadodi Ratkala, Yalalai, 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 B'nai Shabbat, Nikabela.
Rise together facing the door.
Boi v'shalom, Ateret bala, Gam b'simcha, Uvetzola. Tokemunde am segula boi khala le khadoti likrakala yalalai 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 b'nai Shabbat Nikabela yai Chadodi likrakala yalalai 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 b'nai Shabbat Nikabela.
Remain standing, page 28.
Yadadai dai dai, 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 yadadai dai dai. Baruchu et Adonai Hamivorach.
Baruch Adonai Hamivorach
Leolam vaed, Leolam vaed.
Let's hear you.
Yadadai dai dai, 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 yadadai dai dai.
Please be seated. We're on page 31. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Your wisdom sets the way on which time and season glide. Your breath guides the sail of the stars. Creator of the tide of time and light, you guide the current of day into night. As heaven spans to infinity, you set its course for eternity. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Baruch atah Adonai, Hama'ariv Aravim. Page 32.
First, we go into roll into dark on our screen. Roll into dark, roll into light. Night becomes day and day turns to night. Roll into dark, roll into light. Night becomes day and day turns to night. Borei yom v'layla golel or mipnei choshech golel or mipnei choshech v'choshech mipnei or. Roll into dark, roll into light. Night becomes day and day turns to night. Roll into dark, roll into light. Night becomes day and day turns to night.
Page 32.
Ahavat olam, Beit Yisrael, Amcha havta, Amcha havta. Torah u'mitzvot, Chukim u'mishpatim, Otam otanu lemadata. Al Kain Adonai Eloheinu b'shokmeinu uvkumeinu nasiach b'chukecha v'nismach b'direi Toratcha u'mitzvotecha leolam va'ed ki em chayenu v'yorek yameinu Yomam v'layla, ege yomam v'layla. B'ahavadcha al tasir, mimenu leolamim. Baruch ata Adonai, ohev amo Yisrael. Ohev amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad.
Page 36.
V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol meotecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta b'ham v'shiftecha b'veitecha uv'lektecha v'derech uv'shokbecha uv'kumecha ukshartam leot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot b'neinecha uchtavtam al mezuzot beitecha uvisharecha Leman tizkeru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'item kedoshim lelohechem ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim lihiot lachem lelohim ani Adonai Elohechem, Adonai Elohechem, Emet.
In a moment, we're going to move to page 40 as we join together in the words of Mi Chamocha. And I want to just say a word about the way that this prayer has been used in the past. When our ancient rabbis read this prayer in really the scriptural verse, which this prayer is based on, Mi Chamocha ba'elim Adonai, who is like you among the gods, O God. Our rabbis, in the face of all the heartache, all the destruction, all the pain in the world, retooled the verse. In Hebrew, or at least in ancient Hebrew, some of the vowels weren't set. So it wasn't Mi Chamocha ba'elim Adonai, who are you among the gods? It was Mi Chamocha ba'elem Adonai, who is among you among the silent ones, the mute, the lame. Who is you among the one who stands idly by God, who looks at the world crumbling around and says and does nothing? You, God, according to the rabbis, are the most silent of all. And that's a feeling that we get when we face really hard days like today and really hard eras like the era in which we live. It feels like God is silent. It feels like God is mute. It feels like God is lame. It feels like God isn't here for us. The goal in saying Mi Chamocha every day is to realize that we can take God from Mi Chamocha ba'elem Adonai, who is like you among the deaf mutes, and turn it into Michamocha Ba'elim Adonai, who is like you among the gods. The goal is to realize that although God's presence may not be felt in the world, there's a twinkling of God somewhere, and it's magnificent, and it's wonderful, and it's standing beside us in that pain and sorrow. And therefore, we say proudly these words on this page, and we remind ourselves that on times when we don't feel like redemption is possible, God is not deaf, God is not mute, God is not lame, but God is there standing by our side, ready to support us as we march out of that narrow place like Egypt and toward the promised land. Page 40.
Mi kamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha neder b'kodesh, no ra tehilot o sefele, no ra tehilot o sefele. Malechutecha ra'u banecha, bokei hayam lifnei Moshe u'Miriam, ze'elianu ve'amru, ze'elianu ve'ameru.
Let's hear you.
Adonai yimlo le'olam va'ed, Adonai yimlo le'olam va'ed. Yai dai 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 dai. Yai dai 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 dai. Yai dai 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 yai dai 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 dai. Yai dai 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 dai. Yai dai 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 dai. V'ne'amar ki fadadanu et Yaakov u'gielo miyachazak mimenu Baruch ata Adonai Ga'al Yisrael.
We turn now to the screen as we move into Hashkivenu, also turning to page 42.
Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom v'hamidenu shomreinu l'chaim. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom v'hamidenu shomreinu l'chaim. Ushmor tzeitenu.
Middle of that page, indented.
Uvoenu l'chaim u'shalom ve'ata ve'ad olam. Sometimes I lay under the moon and I thank God I'm breathing. Then I pray, don't take me soon, 'cause I am here for a reason. Sometimes in my tears I drown, but I never let it get me down. So when negativity surrounds, I know someday it will all turn around, because all my life I've been waiting for, I've been praying for the people to say that we don't want to fight no more. There'll be no more wars, and our children will play one day, 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 one day. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom v'hamidenu shomreinu l'chaim.
In a moment, we're going to move into our silent Amidah. And after an opening meditation, asking God to open our eyes to truth, we'll move silently through page 62, either with the words on the page or the words in our hearts. We rise together.
Open my eyes to truth. Open my hands to give freely. Open my lips to good words, to pure words. Open my heart to love. Open my eyes to truth. Open my hands to give freely. Open my lips to good words, to pure words. Open my heart to love. Adonai sefatay tiftach, ufi hagid tehilatecha. Open my lips to good words, to pure words. Open my heart to love. We ask for nothing on Shabbat except for the focus on peace. And what that means to each and every one of us could be different, but it's a wholeness. Whether it's the inside we're getting peace or we're helping our hands to form peace on the external. We join together on page 62. Oh, say shalom, bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimeru amen. Oh, say shalom, bimromav. Can't do that high one, sorry. Say shalom, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimeru amen. Oh, say shalom, bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael v'yimeru amen. We move to page 253 as we have this opportunity to pray for those that need healing, whether it's body, mind, or soul. So I'd like to ask you to think of those people's names that perhaps are in your heart, in your mind. And when I look around the room, you can add those names, as well as anyone that's on Zoom that would like to add the names in the chat as well. We'll begin on page 253, and then we'll focus on the screen. Mishaberak avotenu vimotenu, Avraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, v'Leah, u'yivarech et hakolim. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless and heal those who are ill. May the Blessed Holy One be filled with compassion for their health to be restored and their strength to be revived. May God swiftly send them a complete renewal of body and spirit. And let us say, Amen. Misheberach avotenu mekor habracha limotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misheberach imotenu mekor habracha liavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
Shabbat Shalom. I feel like I have a lot that I want to say tonight about the decision that the Supreme Court handed down. And I was going to actually speak about the Supreme Court, but in a different vein. This morning, I was prepared to speak about gun control. I was prepared to speak about that decision. I was prepared to speak about the Senate's bill and what that meant. And I'll get there. At some point, I will probably give that sermon. But tonight on our hearts, I know, is the question about reproductive choice. And for that very reason, I want to spend a few minutes reflecting. And whereas most of my sermons, I had a teacher tell me that the best sermons are sermons that you can summarize in 1 to 2 sentences, most of my sermons kind of fall into that vein. Tonight, instead, I kind of want to talk about the history of this Torah portion moving forward into what to expect for the rest of the summer, Torah-wise, and pause at certain junctures and talk about how it is that it's held up as a mirror to better understand what's going on right now with reproductive choice. Because I wrote earlier today about the first of those observations. In this week's portion, we have the beginning of the 40 years of wandering in the desert. Up until now, the Jews have left Egypt, and it's only been a short time or so, about 1.5 to 2 years, where they've been getting ready to enter into the Promised Land. And so Moses ends up sending 12 scouts out to look at the land, to see who the inhabitants are, to see if the land is good, to see if they want to live there. And they go and they scout the land and they come back. And 10 of the scouts turn around and say, look, the people there are too mighty. It is too scary. We couldn't possibly win. And 2 scouts stand up. It's Joshua and Caleb. And they say no. They say we can do it. They say, despite what the future holds, there's a promised land out there. Now, the 10 that are scared sway the rest of the people so that they call out to God and they say, we don't want to enter. We are too scared too. The people are too mighty. We have been convinced. And God gets so mad, God condemns them to wander in the desert for the remainder of what is 40 years total. 40 years being a generation so that the older generation, those who knew slavery, those who didn't have faith in God, those who were not of the kind of strength of character that would lead them to want to enter the promised land, they would die of old age and a new generation would arise and that generation would be ready to come. And I talked in the email to you earlier today about the fact that right now we are standing at the precipice of a new tomorrow as well. And that's one that seems scary. That's one that is very much unknown to us. And our job in standing at that precipice is to have the courage, the conviction, the strength of Joshua and Caleb, not the pessimism, not the fear, not the timidity of those other 10. And so I want to pause and think a little bit about, well, what does that really mean? Because this week's Torah portion kicks off what is 40 years of wandering in the desert for the Jewish people. And I very much imagine that for the next generation or so, our country is going to be wandering as well. Now, the wandering that happens, by the way, is not an aimless wandering that the people do. Instead, what God condemns them for is basically to be led by God for 40 years through the desert. So you have to imagine, it's not that they couldn't find their way out into the promised land. They're literally standing on the border when Moses sends in those troops. And if you look at the end of the book of Numbers, which we are in now, catalogs all of the stops that the Jewish people take. And there aren't many. There are only a handful. There are only like 24 or so stops, which, by the way, means that in 40 years of wandering, what would happen is they'd go to a new place and they'd set up camp. And it's not like the next day God would tell them to leave. They'd start to make roots. They'd start to make a home. You have to imagine that some of those camps, they would start to feel very comfortable in. They would be the new normal. But the new normal was always ready to be uprooted. The new normal could never be normal because they could know that God would call from afar, that some kind of pillar of smoke and fire, a cloud would descend on the people and tell the people it's time to leave. And the people would have to acquiesce. What does wandering really look like? Wandering doesn't look like closing your eyes and groping in the dark. Wandering, according to the Jewish people, means moving from one stage to the next, not knowing when that stage is going to end, but having hope that it will. The clock got rolled back today. And in 13 states, the clock got rolled all the way back to pre-Roe v. Wade. There are no protections anymore for reproductive rights in places like Alabama. But it doesn't mean that the people there, it doesn't mean our country needs to grope blindly in the dark. It means that we can take steps forward. We can move along a journey as the people did, from stage to stage until finally entering into the promised land. We don't have the power to snap our fingers and suddenly reverse the decision that we found today. But what we do have is the ability through advocacy, through voting, through marching, through raising our voices, through supporting those in places that need the help, to find a way to bring them from place to place to place until they finally are able to enter the promised land. This generation need not be lost. Wandering need not be completely a loss. Wandering could be steps forward, getting toward that place for which we want to see. And we actually have the power to do that. Now, there's a few ways to do that. The first, by the way, is to make sure that we provide avenues for people to tell their stories. If you think about what made the gay rights movement work, and last week we had a really wonderful Pride Shabbat here, it's that people started coming out of the closet. People started telling their friends that they were gay, or they had nephews that were gay, or children that were gay. And suddenly it became normative. So that a plurality, a majority actually, much more than a majority then, began to support rights for the LGBTQ population. Now, by the way, I don't know what the future of that holds with the Supreme Court right now. But I'll tell you that part of the way that reproductive rights will work best, and I've said this publicly before, is allowing ourselves to realize that it's not an abstract thing, but it's a thing that happens for all of us. You're probably sitting among people who have chosen to have an abortion. You yourself may. And it may be the secret that you're holding on to, but when it becomes normative to talk to, when it stops becoming shameful, that becomes a way in which suddenly we realize just how pervasive it is. And the more that we cast a light on it, the more it becomes something that we choose to highlight, to talk about, the more normative it is, the less scary it is too. We don't know what's going on for each of us because we actually don't know what all of our relationships are to choice, to abortions. And the reason for that is because we've never asked. The big fear among those who are anti-choice is that, or at least the thing we have to watch with those who are anti-choice, is that they tell a story that isn't ours. And if you own that story, you need to embrace that story as well. When God got mad at the 10 spies who went into the promised land and came back scared, one of the things God got the most mad about, according to our ancient rabbis, was one line that they said. They said, and I quote, "They were giants," talking about the population who lived in Canaan, "and we were grasshoppers in their eyes." And according to our ancient rabbis, the big sin there is that the spies had no idea how that native population looked at them. In fact, God retorts and says, "How dare they have said we were grasshoppers in their eyes? Perhaps we looked like angels." Because we don't know what's going on in other people's lives, we have to make up stories. And sometimes those stories can get in the way of the real truth. Truth exists within. Truth is our story. And by allowing ourselves to tell our stories and to provide frameworks for people to tell theirs, what we do is we provide an avenue that suddenly we actually see authentically what is in our eyes, not what we project. And so not only can we tell stories, but we also have to be careful about resting on our laurels. So fast forward to those 40 years. The Jews have already wandered in the desert, and they're about to enter the promised land. And 2.5 of the 12 tribes come to Moses. And they say to themselves, "Look, we actually don't want to enter into the promised land. We want to stay behind. We want to make sure that we have the land for our cattle. And we're looking at this kind of fertile ground right outside of the land of Canaan, and we kind of like it. I would rather you just kind of not give us any land in Canaan. We don't want to participate in that. We want to exempt ourselves from the struggle." And I've been thinking a little bit about what that exemption from the struggle really means. Because sitting up here just a couple weeks ago, we heard our acting attorney general, Matt Platkin, talk about what's happening in New Jersey to safeguard our rights. And the truth is, we're all going to be okay, right? As long as you stay exactly where you are, your rights are going to be preserved. There's nothing that really is going to happen that's going to take away from Governor Murphy's ability to protect your ability to choose, your loved one's ability to choose right here in New Jersey. The fear, though, is somewhere else. And I've been thinking a little bit about kind of roads less traveled or roads that could have been. And I don't know if I've spoken publicly about this, but when you offered me this job 4 years ago, I had 2 other offers on the table, really diverse. I could come here, I could go to Salt Lake City, Utah, or I could be the rabbi in Birmingham, Alabama. And I chose here, and I'm so happy that I did. But I'm wondering, there's a little bit of me that feels like, on the one hand, I feel very relieved Amalia doesn't have to grow up in light of this situation in Alabama right now. But I'm also feeling like I'm exempted from the fight. I'm sitting on the sidelines. I'm not the moral Jewish voice in a place where reproductive rights have disappeared saying that we need it. In fact, I'm sitting and talking to a crowd of people for whom pretty much all agree. Maybe there are shades of difference, but on the whole, this congregation, this town, this state is incredibly pro-choice. In a way, I feel a little bit like those 2.5 tribes that are sitting outside of the promised land, right? And I feel like I've exempted myself from that struggle. But in order for Moses to agree for those 2.5 tribes to enter in, what does Moses do? He tells them they have to serve as shock troops. They have to head over the border, give their young men over into the armies that will conquer the promised land and fight beside the tribe of Benjamin and the tribe of Gad and the tribe of Zebulun and the tribe of Asher, those tribes that are actually in the fight themselves, which means that we have to do that too. We can't look around and say we're okay. We can't look for these micro changes that might be happening in New Jersey. We can always be better, especially around education and access to contraception, which are kind of the next rung of what we need to do in order to preserve the rights that we need here. Instead, it means lending a hand, lending a voice, lending our pocketbooks, going down to the places where the fight is happening and take to the streets with those people. It means realizing that if we are going to do the moral thing, once we've wandered in the desert for 40 years with our brethren, we got to be shock troops beside them. We got to stand united with them, advocating for a better tomorrow. It all began because we had no vision for the future. That's the reason the Jews wandered for 40 years. It's because of the fear of those 10. Be the 2. And as you are the 2, comfort each other through that wandering. It's a long road ahead, but your voice matters, your faith matters, your strength matters. And you can add just a little bit of voice and strength to this world that we so desperately need. I'm standing here beside you throughout, and I'm so glad to be in this fight with this congregation. Shabbat Shalom. We're going to move now to page 282 as we rise together for Aleinu.
Aleinu l'shabeach ladon hakol, latet gedula leotzer breshit, shelo asanu kigoye haratzot, velo samanu kamishpachot adama, shelo sam chelkeinu kahem, vegor aleinu kechol hamonam, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא.
287.
ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד.
Please be seated. Our thoughts now turn to those who we love and who we have lost. As I call the name of your loved one, if you're observing a yard site, I'll invite you to rise and to remain standing. This Shabbat, we remember the following individuals: Ida Abrahams, Max Bass, Alfred Berman, Harry Blatt, Zoe Gellin-Brown, Samuel Carlin, Norman Colley, Sarah Leah Eisenberg, Kenneth Frankel, Gabriel Friedman, Morris Harris, Edith Hirsch, Minna Kimmel, Adam Lucino, Gertrude Lusberg, Harriet McNamara, Gertrude Reback, Zachary Rosenfield, Arlene Roth, Sadie Roth, Sylvia Rubin, Elaine Safeman, Max Saracen, Ann Sherman, Leonard Silverstein, Rachel Singman, Rosita Souza, Sarah Spiegelford, Max Spitz, Florence Stein, Leon Stein, Ruth Traum, Celia Turkowitz, Alma Walensky, and Nathan Zeisel. And those who are in their Shiva and Shloshim periods of mourning, Sylvia Vincent Arbor IV, cousin of Brian Arbor, Roberta Handler, mother of Jolien Handler, Robert Coulter, brother of Joan Marie Coulter, and Florence Berner, mother of Alan Berner. In addition, I'll invite you to rise and share the name of the person that you're thinking, if you're within your 1 year period of mourning for them, or you are observing a yard site who might not have been on this list, whether family or friend. We turn to page 294. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. V'yamad divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei. V'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayetecho beit Yisrael. Ba'gala uvizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam alamei amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudesha barechu. Le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbachata v'nechamata. Da'amiran b'yoma v'yimru amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav. Hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Please be seated. So a few announcements before we move into our closing song. The first is, this is the last Shabbat that I'm going to see you formally as your leader for the next 2 months. So you should know, by the way, we very much work during the summer. We just, we just decide that we are going to work like normal people hours, and we work 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. And so we will be around, make appointments, love to see you, and we may pop in and out. But it means that our services are lay-led for the summer, which is a gift you give us to be able to, have like bagels on Saturday morning with our families and stuff like that. So so I want to wish you a wonderful next 8 or 9 Shabbatot, and just know that there's a handful, I think, of Torah reading or giving a drash or things like that are available. And so if you're interested in one of those, come talk to Ronnie Pressman, who's coordinating for the summer. In addition, and I mentioned this in the email to the congregation, the Caffeinated Convo, which is a kind of series that the Planned Parenthood has, they organically were going to be doing it here on the 6th of July. And so I think that now it's going to be a pretty big thing. It's interfaith. I've been on many of the emails where Planned Parenthood has been inviting lots of the local churches and mosques around to be part of it too. So hopefully you can join. I don't think it's going to be streamed because it's not like a frontal program. It's like breaking into groups and having conversations and then coming back. But if it is streamed, I will let the congregation know about that. But I think the format does not, unfortunately, lend itself to an online presence. So I hope that you'll come and join us in person, and I will tell you if I am wrong about the streaming. Is there anything you want to add about announcements for the summer, Ronnie?
No, there are just a couple of slots, so please come see me. If you've never chanted Torah and you're like, oh, I can't do that, you really can. So come see me, because it's not a big, long portion. It's a few verses.
Yeah. So with that, we're going to move into closing. Bi'ado avkid ruchi. We say to God, into your hand I give my soul, and take care of it, oh God. And the last line in the beautiful piyut, the beautiful poem, Adon Olam. You can find the words on the screen.
Biyado avki ruchi Be'edishan v'yahira Be'im ruchi geviati Adonai li v'lo ira Be'im ruchi geviati Adonai li v'lo ira. My soul I give to you, my spirit in your care. Draw me near, I shall not fear. Hold me in your shall not fear.
Adonai li v'lo ira. Thank you to Bob Melman for accompanying tonight. And Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.